Good evening. Today, we have witnessed some very problematic news regarding the nation's capital. Early on today, Trump was holding a Stop the Seal rally at the Ellipse, which is a 52-acre park just south of the White House fence, where a couple of hundred of Trump supporters had amassed and listened to the speech that he gave. Um, what made it even more important was today Congress was set to tally the election votes of all the states at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After the rally, the supporters of Donald Trump then descended onto the Capitol, um, where they began to breach security and forcibly enter the building. Security at the U.S. Capitol tried their best to uh, ascertain control of the situation, but um, they could not hold back this enraging force that was coming ahead of them. Uh, the members of the House then tried to restore order. They barricaded the doors leading into the um, symposium where the tally was being held. Security, armed security, then barricaded the doors and held the protesters, rioters at bay. Um, One woman was shot and she later died of her injuries. And in total, as of right now, 13 people were arrested out of what looked like maybe a couple of hundred, approximately 500, 600 people. This, of course, was promoted on all media platforms, as we have never seen the likes of which American citizens descended upon a government institution and forcibly entered the premises with nefarious intentions in mind. Now, for me personally, I actually support the idea of holding government officials accountable, including going straight to their places of employment. But the reasons for which they did it were wrong. And I'm going to try my best to explain in this video as to why I think the act was right, but the message was wrong. Now, as for election fraud, I don't vote. I don't support any political party. I don't support the divisive nature of humankind. And that's what the area, well, the essence of politics is: left and right, good and bad. Uh, this is also permeated or purported by the legacy media. In fact, they're to blame today for what is happening afterwards, furthering the divide of the American people. So, what do I mean by the act was right and the message is wrong? I don't think, excuse me, I don't think that the people viewing this video are ignorant regarding uh, geopolitics or domestic politics. If you follow my channel, if you watch videos I post almost every day, I try my best to show primary source material showing um, the problems of our foreign policy as well as our domestic policies. And why I think we should hold these people accountable for the crimes that they commit in our name. And when they say the United States, that involves us. And it's us primarily. But we're not the ones committing these egregious acts of war crimes and human rights abuses. It's the people that we elect, that we support through our votes, financially, even spiritually, for those of the belief in the deity. The message was wrong. Now, like I said, I don't vote, but there's no evidence for any election fraud. And I think it's now to the 7 states that were suspected of being involved in election fraud. All the court systems of each state have voted against the notion of election fraud. And it's not just primarily a Democrat issue, it's a partisan issue because even the Republican led Supreme Court doesn't agree with the notion of election fraud. And you have had many other Republicans come out, including General James Mattis, um, other Republican congressmen not involved with the Stop the Steal movement that have come out and said that we need a peaceful transition to power. But the message was wrong. If you want to hold congressional people, elected officials, responsible for crimes or abuses of civil liberties, domestic or globally, we need to have the evidence showing that they committed these egregious acts, infringement acts upon their fellow man. And there are plenty of examples here to choose from. Over the last couple of decades, the U.S. witnessed some of the largest protests, mainly for human rights. And the protest that we saw today is pitiful. And that's not a general accusation of the Republicans or the conservatives. I'm not implicating these fanatics from the Trump camp as rational conservatives or rational Republicans, centrists or moderates. And they're not rational at all. They're just like fanatics from the left who follow Obama. First of all, you shouldn't be following any president blindly just because they're of a select political group that you adhere to. It's not normal. It's cultish almost. And I saw it with Obama. And I see it a lot with Trump. But the protests, human protests in the United States, the largest protests ever in the United States mainly dealt with the human issue, human rights that affect everybody from a select group of people. In 1970, it was Earth Day, in which we saw approximately 20 million people in the United States. In 2020, it was the George Floyd protests, judicial abuses upon minority communities, people of color, and people who are poor. That includes Caucasians. Mainly, that's the bigger issue. And approximately 20 to 25 million in the United States protested. In 2017, it was the Women's March. Approximately 4 million people in the United States protested and showed their solidarity for women's rights. In 1982, it was for the anti-nuclear weapons march, and approximately 1 million people protested. And through these protests, we got the attention of the elected officials, and they modified certain regulations, certain rules, certain laws to alleviate some of the problems that we had with these issues. Now, with George Floyd, that happened last year, and um, regarding the judicial industry, which is becoming more militant by the day, I don't think that issue is ever going to be resolved. They may modify uh, or defund certain precincts in the United States, but as a whole, what we need is a different form of training. Same thing for the anti-nuclear weapons march. Um, we didn't manufacture more nuclear weapons, but we still have approximately, I think now it's 7,000 nuclear bombs, which is more than enough to kill the world, I think 1,500 times over. Um, and of course, one of the biggest protests on the face of the earth, which was in 2003, the Iraq War protest, in which globally 30 million people protested. 30 million. Protests can make a change. It can bring about um, reform where we need it the most. It'll bring about the attention of the people from elected officials who use the military, who use the police, who use civil servants, the intelligence apparatuses to commit egregious crimes in our name. And we need to hold these people accountable. So let me alleviate more about why I think the message was wrong regarding the Trump supporters who descended upon the Capitol. As I said before, there really is no hard evidence of election fraud. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And I'm going to get into that later about this country's history of election fraud in other countries. So if we're willing to do it in other countries, what makes you think they don't do it here where it counts? But we had numerous instances where both the left and right paradigms of the political field committed horrific acts upon their fellow man globally, mainly the Middle East, and here inside the United States when it comes to the Constitution, our civil liberties, which are slowly eroding, but ever so incrementally, where you can't notice the changes until it's too late. Um, the open act of revolt against the a corrupt entity like the U.S. government, I think, is long overdue. Now, what I mean by that too is we need also um, the motivation, the justification to enact a revolt, because as you could see today, even people from the right side of the legacy media were condemning the acts of these Trump supporters, right? And what does that tell you? That when it comes down to the threat of upending not democracy, but upending the corrupt nature of the federal government, what they'll do is they'll act as one singular entity and demonize the very people uh, that are trying to force change for the better. And so, what I not to um, show deference to the left, but to show you that, aha, you see, you got what you deserved. But now maybe people from the right will start realizing that the judicial abuses that were happening to people of color, to people who are poorer than them, people financially destitute are being just as abused by these people that they were behind, finally can come together as one. But instead, what is happening? The opposite. The left is demonizing the right who are being now the victims of police abuse, the last 2 days anyway, but not historically. Um, Instead, what did the left do, especially from the political field? They went on Twitter, they went on Facebook, and said, good for them. The police should have shot these rioters. Instead, what you should have done was basically say, you understand what we were trying to do here. The message that we were trying to convey to you. It wasn't an echo chamber. It was a message to the global community as a whole to say, hey, we need real reform. Now, we need the message to justify the nature of a revolt. And we've had our chances at explicating it. But due to our divisive mindset, which took decades and decades to imbue these divisive thoughts into our brain cells, into our mindset, we dismiss these criminal incidents due to our complete devotion to the political ideology that we choose to defend, whether it's from the left or right. Um, so when I see left proponents, people of the Democratic base, people of the centrists, the moderate left, the extreme left, take to the airwaves, go on video, um, post messages on Twitter, on Facebook, demonizing the right, demonizing Trump, demonizing their supporters. Well, I would say that you have selected outrage. Where was this same transparent outrage from the right when Trump continued the wars of Bush Obama? This same level of outrage from the right to the left that we see today when Obama was in office, hanging effigies of Obama, hanging them by the noose, burning effigies of Obama on their Twitter pages, proud to say it in blackface. Well, my voice to you would be this, to those of the right. Where was that transparent outrage when Trump was dropping bombs in the same countries that Bush Obama was dropping their bombs? In fact, by 2020, more than 7,423 bombs were used just in Afghanistan. More bombs were used in Afghanistan under the Trump administration than every single administration ever in history. Not to mention, he continued the wars in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Pakistan, and worst of all, Yemen, the worst human rights crisis in the world, by supporting the corrupt monarchy of Saudi Arabia. Where was this same level of outrage when the U.S. attorney, then U.S. attorney William Barr, adamantly refused to release information showing Saudi financing for the 9/11 attacks? Here we have a government official inside the Republican cabinet adamantly refusing to declassify pertinent information where 3,000 American civilians were killed in a terrorist attack in which Saudi Arabia was financing a part of it. Where was this same level of outrage you showed today when Bush Jr. allowed his cabinet to lie before the United Nations under Secretary of State Colin Powell to enter a war in Iraq where over 1 million Iraqis are dead? 1 million Iraqis dead. Where was your outrage? Why weren't you climbing the steps of the U.S. Capitol, the White House? Why weren't you at the steps of the Washington Monument or at the elected officials' homes protesting outside the streets? Where was this same level of outrage when Bush Jr. refused to hold anyone accountable from the CIA in denying the FBI information regarding two living 9/11 hijackers inside the United States for 16 months? This information came out in the 9/11 Commission. You should have been in the streets then, protesting not just the Bush administration, but the CIA. You were silent regarding these certain egregiouses. You did nothing to protest these, to show your outrage, your moral outrage for these things. And I just stood locally. I didn't even go back decades and decades ago. I don't need to. We're talking about the present moment or relevant time. But you from the left, you have no position here. I saw all day today on Twitter, on Facebook, demonizing these Trump supporters, demonizing them for descending on the Capitol. Traitors, seditionists, you called them. Well, what should we call you when you deny the crimes committed under Democratic presidents, committed under their cabinet members, the elected officials? You share some culpability too by refusing to protest against the crimes done under Obama or Clinton. Where was your outrage when Obama helped to train and fund jihadist organizations like Dar al Sham, al Nusra, in upending a democratically elected government under Bashar al Assad in Syria? Through the CIA, called Timber Sycamore. And that came from General David Petraeus, in which he involved Barack Obama, who was hesitant at first, but then he agreed, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, and King Abdullah of Jordan. Why are we allowing foreign governments to interfere in another government using an intelligence agency from the United States to upend a foreign government? How can you say you're for democracy here on the left when you're in favor or you dismiss the crimes of trying to upend a democratic elected government in a foreign land? Where was the same level of disgust you showed for the right when Obama used hundreds of drone strikes in 7 Arab countries, killing over 2,000 civilians in the process, hereby extending the war on terror? Where was this level of outrage when Bill Clinton created the NAFTA Act, which ensured the job markets to relocate to foreign countries, losing 682,900 jobs, which suppressed wages and the unions who lost leverage because of this one act, destroying the middle class worker forever in the United States? You weren't protesting then? I ain't see you on TV climbing over the Capitol for something like this. Where was this same level of outrage when Obama used the NSA to collect American citizens' data through the phone accounts of major companies like AT&T and Verizon and store them for all of time at a place called the Utah Data Center without warrant, while also being under constant surveillance every second of the day? So let's be honest with ourselves here. This is selective outrage, so long as it's coming from the opposite spectrum of politics. Because if the criminality is coming from the very people you helped elect, you end up either ignoring them altogether or dismissing it as part of the plans in preserving democracy. Now, I don't want to sound like a broken record. I'm not supporting the reason for this riot either. Again, there's no evidence for election fraud, and no court in the state suspected of fraud, including the Supreme Court. Again, the message is wrong. What we need desperately in this country is not a revolution in the streets first. It's a revolution within ourselves first. We can't make changes unless we make the changes internally to make the changes externally. If we do not act as a singular, cohesive unit with the message being that the U.S. federal government, along with its entities like the Pentagon, like the CIA, and hold them accountable for the numerous crimes, past and present, we will lose the fight if we do not do just that. We are too manipulated along the schematic constructs that keep us away from each other. These schisms also redefine our individuality and ultimately, the most important, as a human race. The divisive constructs in which I explained in other videos when it comes to politics, sexism, racism, religion, organized religion, not spirituality. These are meant to divide us further. Is it not working? Are you not seeing it right at the present moment? You didn't need today's events to see that. You have been witness and a party to it even previously. Yesterday, the day before, the week before, the month before, years before, to the present right now. And this is exactly where they want you, fighting each other, demonizing each other on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere you can. Just as make sure that you are not a cohesive, solidified unit. Because that's what they fear, the power of the people. And this is the reason why they go to great lengths to use the legacy media, billboards, newspapers, internet sites, making sure that the people on NBC and CBS, ABC, oh, these were white protesters. These were Trump supporters from the right. And then you go on CNN as well, and they do the same thing. But when you go to Fox and Newsmax and OAN, they make sure to demonize the left. Though they're Antifa. Only Antifa can do this. Make sure that there's two opposing sides and they're always at each other. They're the enemy, right? And that's what they're trying to convey to you, that you are the enemy to each other. Make sure to not use the legacy media to look inwardly, because if they did, and we had a real responsible media, we'd be chastising the very entities who made us this way and who commit these egregious acts upon their fellow man here and abroad. We don't have a responsible media of the legacy media anymore. Not when 6 corporations own all the channels. And that's what matters because they dictate what is right and what is wrong, what is true, what is false. There is no left and right media. They play it that way so that you, who constantly watch TV, are meant to watch their information, and their information is basically manipulated, even downright fraudulent. They're op ed pieces. They don't really report the news that's important. They don't want you educated, informed. They want you constantly confused, angry, and always in conflict with each other. Now, I was going to bring up before about the idea of election fraud for those who may say, well, this election wasn't fraudulent. Yes, I may agree that, yes, there's no evidence for election fraud right now. Maybe not even in the future. Maybe not at all. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And if it happens abroad and it's done by the United States, what makes you think they won't do it here? Because this is where it counts. The real power base lies here. Some examples would be the 1964 Chilean election between Eduardo Frei Montalva and Salvador Allende, in which the U.S. Supplied $2.6 million to funding for Montalva because Allende was a prominent Marxist, and the funding was used to destroy Allende's reputation. So why are we interfering in Chile? 1996, Israeli election between Shimon Peres and Benjamin Netanyahu. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, so now they needed a new president. Well, then U.S. President Bill Clinton admitted that he interfered on behalf of Netanyahu, but never explained how he interfered with it. So here we have an elected official, the president, admitting that he interfered on behalf of an election in Israel, a foreign country. In 1953, the CIA interfered with an election after it took place by supplanting then Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh by using a manufactured coup d'etat by the CIA, in which Mossadegh was then replaced with a Western backed Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, who in turn, the country then, just a short years ago, less than 15 years, 20 years, we got the Iranian Revolution, in which the mullahs, which helped govern the country, now are in charge. Thanks to the United States, of course, the CIA. Need I continue? I mean, I could give you a list, but I don't want to bore you. Okay, military interventions that the U.S. propagates and involves themselves in, such as Afghanistan and the support for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in 1979. We also supported the UNITA movement in Angola, the Solidarity movement in Poland, the Contra revolt in Nicaragua, the Khmer's People National Liberation Front in Cambodia. You know how many people were killed in just in Nicaragua and Cambodia involving the CIA in these fascist nationalist movements? Tens of thousands killed, including media, independent media. So for decades and decades, we have been interfering with foreign governments and their democratic way of life for over 100 years. Yet none of this is recognized by the people who support these administrations politically, financially. That's coming from the very people called the U.S. citizenry. Either you have short term memory loss or you dismiss uh, these crimes because uh, the administrations were on your side, so to speak. They're not on your side. They made you believe they are. They're not for you. Trump and Biden and Clinton and Obama and Bush Jr. and Bush Sr., they're symptoms. The disease is the system of government, and we need to make changes. And they're not going to come through peaceful protests. What got their attention? Well, climbing the walls of the U.S. Capitol and breaking in, yeah, that got their attention, all right, because it was through the legacy media and through the interviews of certain Republicans and Democrats who condemned the actions of these people, calling them terrorists. Incidentally, the word terrorist used in the Patriot Act wasn't defining to just Arabs. It was left open for interpretation because you are the next terrorist, the American people. And you of the right and you of the left, you had better wake up. Because the real awakening is when you shed those political uh, parameters, knowing that they're unnatural to begin with, and act accordingly and act uh, as one unit, as one community, because this is where it counts. We are a human community, but we're divided along political and human constructed lines, and that's not natural. It's not normal either, and it's creating this fervent, radical mindset within us, and we're fighting each other, and that's how exactly what people in positions of power want, because heaven forbid for them if we took out that proverbial IV out of our arm that's been giving us junk, giving us these manufactured thoughts, and we start looking together as one to the real problem, to the agencies that made us this way, um, then the system and the game is over.